The Supreme Court just finished hearing arguments in a monumental case threatening access to medication abortion in the U.S., even in states where abortion remains legal. The lawsuit brought by a group of anti-abortion doctors and medical organizations alleges that the FDA violated the law in how it regulated mifepristone. CNN's Paula Reed is outside the Supreme Court. So, Paula, what were the key arguments in this case, and did the justices give any inclination on how they may rule?
Yeah, Manu, at this point, it appears a majority of justices are skeptical that this conservative group has standing or the right to bring this lawsuit. And that was the focus of most of the questions throughout this hearing. Now, this conservative group argues that, the medical professionals within it could at some point be called upon to issue medical treatment to someone who has had complications from using mifepristone. And they say they object to that, and that's what gives them standing. But lawyers for the government have said, wait a second, you haven't actually been harmed. There's no imminent harm. And there are already federal exemptions and protections for you if you object to something related to abortion in terms of medical treatment. So it's interesting to hear the justices across the ideological spectrum press all the lawyers on this question of standing. Now let's take a listen to what Justice Alito said about this issue.
Could you provide a more specific answer to the first question that Justice Thomas asked you? Is there anybody who could challenge in court the lawfulness of what the FDA did here?
In this particular case, I think the answer is no.
Well, that wasn't my question. Is there anybody who can do that? Let's start with the states that intervened below.
All right, Justice Alito clearly did not like that answer, but the Supreme Court has recognized the fact that there are cases where, not necessarily in each case does someone somewhere have standing. Now, this would be an off-ramp, Manu, for the justices if they don't even want to get into the issue of medication abortion and instead say, look, this group doesn't have standing. And we also heard from a lawyer from a drug company because the stakes here are incredibly high, not just for people who may need access to this drug, but also for the FDA and other medications that it has approved. So this is absolutely one of the most high-stakes cases the justices are looking at today, and hundreds of protesters gathered in front of the court today.
Yeah, of course, and all in the middle of a critical election year. Thank you for that reporting, Paula. And we're going to break this all down with my great panel, CNN's Joan Poskupik, who is actually inside the courtroom during the arguments and made it back here in time, Bloomberg, and CNN's Nia Malika Henderson, and CNN's Kristen Holmes. Thanks for joining me. It's impressive how quickly you got here. It literally just ended minutes ago.
I know, but it's so great.
Yeah.
I love coming back to be able to tell you what it's like.
Yes, what was it like?
Well, you can really feel the weight of the moment. Just think of how important medication abortion is nationwide, especially in the 2 years since the Dobbs ruling when the justices reversed Roe v. Wade. This is the most common way that women who want to end a pregnancy are able to end a pregnancy. So there's a lot at stake here. And I just want to tell you that whenever there's a big argument like this, you get lots of people coming there as a field trip and for different reasons. And, I'll just mention a couple people in Manu. This is just right up your street. Senator Josh Hawley was there because his wife, Erin Hawley, represents the challengers here, saying that physicians who are anti-abortion are harmed by these FDA provisions, and they're the ones challenging it. But also Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, because the states are very much involved on the periphery of trying to have a stake in this. So I can tell you that it was, you could feel the energy in the room, but you could also feel, if you take this at face value, just face value, and I'm going to give you a caveat on why, the justices, key justices, Justices Kavanaugh, Justices Barrett, and the Chief Justice John Roberts seem to have enough skepticism that these anti-abortion physicians who do not prescribe mifepristone, but who are claiming that their emergency room work are affected by botched abortions, that they have standing. But there was a lot of suspicion about that. Do they really? Have they ever had to really participate in terminating a pregnancy? But the one caution I have is that sometimes Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett can send a little bit of a false signal, especially on the issue of abortion. But I think as it stands, the court will probably not get to the merits of the FDA's provisions, that they will stop it and say this particular group had no grounds to bring the lawsuit. And again, I just want to emphasize the stakes, since so much medication abortion is how most people end a pregnancy, and also to reiterate the importance of FDA having its own expertise in scientific studies to write drug drug regulations and what is permissible.
And just to point out what you're saying here about the use of medication abortions in America, just look at the increase. Look at this chart from 2000 up until 2023, up to 63% in this country. Nearly 2/3 of all abortions were medication abortions. What would be interesting if the justices do sidestep this issue and say the plaintiffs don't have standing on this. We'll see how the American public reacts. Just look at the polls on how people view this right now. But the idea of banning the use of medication abortion nationwide. This is from a Kaiser Foundation poll. 32%, that's 32% support it. 66% oppose it. And similarly about criminalizing mailing abortion pills where abortion is banned, just 37% support it. So, Nia, I guess the question is, if the justices decide to sidestep this and say they have no standing, what impact does that have electorally? Because, look, the Biden campaign, Biden and Harris are down in North Carolina today campaigning against what the Supreme Court is doing, but maybe the Supreme Court will keep it legal.
Yeah, listen, I think it's good for Republicans if they do keep this legal, right? If all of a sudden the Supreme Court steps in here and says this very common way of having abortions is now all of a sudden illegal in the country, I think this would be a bad thing for Republicans. You can tell Donald Trump himself is very uneasy, right, with where the country is in terms of abortion. He, on the one hand, wants to take credit for, as he calls it, killing Roe v. Wade, but he also now is trying to figure out something much more politically palatable, right?
Yeah.
Floating 15 weeks. He also likes 16 weeks, apparently, because it's a nice round number, apparently. So they know, Republicans know that this is just a political minefield for them, given where the country is. But again, this is what they wanted, and now they have been paying the political price over and over.
It's been the dog who caught the car since the Dobbs decision. And just before you jump in, just so viewers know what Trump was saying, as Nia just alluded to, about where he stands on this issue.
The number of weeks now, people are agreeing on 15, and I'm thinking in terms of that, and it'll come out to something that's very reasonable. But people are really, even hardliners are agreeing. Seems to be 15 weeks, seems to be a number that people are agreeing at. But I'll make that announcement at the appropriate time.
How has Trump been finessing this issue?
I mean, I don't know whether he's finessing it. I think that, a lot of people said that gave some clarity into his stance on abortion. I don't think it did. I think when Donald Trump talks about abortion, he uses convoluted terms. He intentionally says things like, I might back this, I'm looking at this. He never says definitively that something related to abortion is good or that he's going to enact a national ban, and that's all intentional. I mean, yes, is he floating this idea right now? If you talk to anyone on his campaign, do they think it's going to happen? No, there are no plans for a rollout. This is, as Nia said, one of the things that's going to dog him throughout the entire general election, because he wants both sides. He wants to be able to talk about abortion like this to make sure that his conservative hardliners are in line and behind him, but he also wants to completely sidestep the issue and not have to deal with it. And just to your point, we've spoken to a number of Republicans who also hope that this just goes away, because if this came out and there was a ruling in June, they believe they could look at the exact same thing that happened in 2022, which was Roe v. Wade being overturned. Then there's
Can I
significant
just
loss.
give a quick PS on it?
Go ahead, quick.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say real quick is this is not about whether this drug would be banned. It's the availability at 7 weeks versus 10 weeks in mail-in drugs, just so people don't think that this could all go down the tubes.
That's a great point of clarification. Thank you. That's why we have Joe Piscopic here to give us critical analysis.